Hello and welcome to part 3 in our II Thessalonians 2 series. Although I will say it's going to take us through the whole book. But we started in II Thessalonians 2, and in part 1, just a quick recap, we discussed the setup to the context and the situationality of why this letter is being written and to whom it's being written, and went through verse 1. But presented the context and the situationality of this chapter, of this book, really, but of this chapter with the missionary journey. There is a rush of people, specifically pre-tribbers, to ascribe the meaning of this as a repetition of the sequence of events as given in 1 Thessalonians 4 and 5. And that is not appropriate to do because in the plain text of this chapter, it specifically tells you that you need to go to the missionary journey, which centers on the book of Acts. So far, and then in part 2, we went through a greater in-depth of verse 1 because I realized that there were a couple of things that I left out of part 1 that I wanted to cover. So we started back in verse 1 and talked about the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, because I continued to get comments about how people just aren't sure that that doesn't talk about the rapture. But the clarification is made in the chapter itself down here when you're talking about coming. It's the parousia. It's the physical appearance of Christ. And if we don't understand that from verse 1, we should absolutely understand that from verse 7, where it talks about destroying the beast with the brightness of his coming. And then it says the coming of the beast will be after the power of Satan with all power and signs and lying wonders. And that's where we're going to start in verse 6 and continue along in our study. But truly, we need to understand that this is written in the context of the second coming. And that's when we went back into chapter 1 and established further context about what the implication of being alive on earth at the time of the second coming would have been for these people. And that's where you can kind of bring in the previous epistle and the sequence of events, and Paul writing to the Thessalonians in the first epistle, 1 Thessalonians 5, and saying, you have no need that I write unto you, for the day of the Lord, talking about the second coming, comes as a thief in the night, but you're not children of the light and of the dark, you're not children of night and of darkness, you're children of light and day, so it doesn't apply to you. So when you bring that back into this chapter, it's like, well, you told us it didn't apply, but now we're being told by this spirit word letter as from Paul and his people that the day of the Lord is at hand. And that was one of the other things that we went through in part 2, is this should say day of Kyrios, not day of Christos. The day of the Lord, which I don't think there's any of us that don't understand the day of the Lord is a reference to the second coming. This gets a little bit hairy when people talk about day of Christ, because then they read rapture into that. Specifically, the day of Christ is talked about in the book of Philippians, and it's not talking about the second coming. So if you're picking up on that, then you're going to be all over the place with regard to the context and the situationality of this. So one of the word studies we went through in part 2 was day of Christ. We also went through falling away first, and we talked about why Paul would have been discussing Old Testament law, Psalms, and prophets. One of the things that I will end our recap by discussing is that we really, truly need to identify, understand beyond a shadow of a doubt. And I know that this is, like, every single thing that I'm talking about in this sequence of events is highly debated. And that's part of the reason why there is so much misunderstanding around the context of this book, this chapter, but this book on the whole, is because all of these things are highly debated. Well, naturally that stirs my attention because I want to get to the bottom of things. I don't want to circle around in conversation or think, well, this sounds like a reasonable thing, or this sounds like a good idea, or I want it to mean this, and etc. It's like, no, there is a specific meaning attached. And so I'd kind of like to know what that is, irrespective of what and who, what these other beliefs are and who might believe them. It's like, I just want to know what the Bible is actually trying to tell us. And so when we center on this verse 5 and the missionary journey in the book of Acts, then we become very quick to conclude that the rapture is not going to be in view at all in the book of Acts in the missionary journeys, because he's teaching exclusively out of Jewish synagogues on the Sabbath days, reasoning with them out of their scriptures, which would include law, psalms, and prophets only. The rapture is not in the Old Testament law, psalms, or prophets. And again, I realize that there are other people who would dispute with me on this. Great, you do you. It's not in there. It's part of two separate mysteries that were revealed in the New Testament, meaning it won't be in the Old. That is the very definition of a biblical mystery, is it is the details of which were not revealed in the Old Testament. Case in point, you're told in the end time chapters of the book of Isaiah that Gentiles will be in the kingdom. But you are never told how they get there, because when Isaiah was written, they were under the Old Covenant, and the Old Covenant wasn't given to Gentiles. So there are other events that would occur in the New Testament which would end the Old Covenant and institute the New and disperse it to the Gentiles. Clearly, that's not in the Old Testament. It's part of mysteries. And a biblical mystery is something that the end result of is in the Old Testament, but the means by which that is able to be accomplished are not revealed until the New Testament. The rapture is part of two biblical mysteries, which means by default, by the very definition of the word mystery, it will not be in the Old Testament. Type and shadow, yes, we are not talking about type and shadow. We are talking about the plain and direct text of the law, psalms, and prophets, which is what the context of this is. He says, remember ye not that when I was yet with you, I told you these things. Where was he? In Thessalonica. When they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where was a synagogue of the Jews. And as his manner was, went in unto them, and 3 Sabbath days reasoned with them out of their scriptures, opening and alleging that Christ must needs have suffered and risen again from the dead, and that this Jesus whom I preach unto you is Christ. That is Acts 17. That is what you need to go back to for understanding about where he was, who he was teaching, how he was teaching, what he was teaching. And the rapture is 1,000% beyond the scope of anything that he would have been talking to the Jews on Sabbath days about. So, when we understand that, and you can understand that significantly more readily from Acts 13, which I will leave you to read the monologue yourself. That is your homework. If you are unfamiliar with it, please do that, and you will learn very quickly what Paul was teaching on the Sabbath days in these Jewish synagogues in the Gentile cities throughout the book of Acts, of which Thessalonica was one. Remember ye not that when I was yet with you, I told you these things. So he's going to be talking about something that is overtly stated in the law, psalms, and prophets regarding the second coming of Jesus Christ, which is the context set up in verse 1. And it's further established in verse 8 that the coming that's in reference is the second coming. The time at which the brightness of his coming, which is the glorious appearing, is going to destroy the beast. And yes, we read about that in Revelation 19. So he's talking about the second coming, and he's talking specifically about the two things he told them must precede the second coming. Now, the rapture is not going to be one of them in this context. Do we know that it will precede the second coming? Yes, we do, but that is not what this chapter is talking about. So while it is true, you could say a million things could precede the second coming, the rapture being one of them, but it's beyond the scope of this chapter. There are two specific things that in the law or in a psalm or in a prophet are clearly stated in the direct text need to happen before the second coming. And that's what he's saying up here, and we discussed that in part 2, is it's the cessation of the sacrifices and offerings, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate. Pertinent to the people in Thessalonica when II Thessalonians was written, because it was written circa 53 AD, while there was a temple still standing in Jerusalem, which means that this was the simplest answer that Paul could give these people as to why the second coming would not be nigh upon them. Because the two things which Daniel, the prophet, states must occur before the second coming had not occurred. Verifiably, they had not occurred, which means that they had been lied to, and it was time to settle down the ruffled feathers, calm down, return to evangelism, and go back to work, which are two things that they had quit while thinking that the second coming and judgment of that day was nigh upon them. So the quickest answer, the most succinct answer that Paul could give these people to show them that they had been lied to was to pull the prophecy from Daniel 9:27, which states, "In the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate." Well, the consummation that be poured upon the desolate is the end of the 70th week, until he have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, then all these things shall be finished. And then that ends with the second coming. So you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that if neither of those midpoint things have occurred, then the second coming ain't nigh upon you. That's the purpose of this. So this brings us into part 3, where, as I left off in part 2, these 3 verses are simply a restatement of verses 3 and 4. They are not providing new information. There are many different word studies that are necessary to understand what the conveyance of the point of this chapter is. And I actually wrote a post about this on my posts tab where I said, I'm a biblical literalist. And I said, in as much as it is possible to take the Bible literally, we always want to do that. But it's also a scapegoat technique for people who say, well, I read the Bible literally, and a plain text reading, a surface level reading of this gives me the answer that I need, and I'm not going to go any further. That's great. And you're going to come away with a very wrong interpretation of this, because the Bible was not written in English. We should never be satisfied with a plain text reading if the Bible was not written in the language you are plain text reading it in. You always need to verify whether or not your understanding is accurate with word studies, going back to, in this case, the original Greek. And that is why this is such a word study heavy chapter, because a plain text surface reading of this is going to have you coming away with an absolutely incorrect understanding. When you go to the word studies, you will come away with a correct understanding. But again, you're not going to be able to do that outside of the word studies. There are certain chapters in the Bible that are not basic reading. This is one of them. And so calling yourself a biblical literalist and saying, well, I can get an answer by just reading it. Great. But why would you automatically suspect that it'll be the right understanding? Having the ability to read the text does not automatically inherently mean you have the ability to understand the text. And that is where I'm getting with this. Parts 1 and part 2 were filled with word studies. Part 3 will be exactly the same, so that we can, in no uncertain terms, identify that there is a specific, explicit meaning for this text that many people are missing, because they have a preconceived idea about the sequence of events from the first epistle. And one of the things I truly do not understand is people say post-trib rapture because the man of sin hasn't been revealed yet. But they'll say the falling away is a reference to the rapture, but it says a falling away first. So I don't even understand how people, post-tribbers, are able to rationalize this away, because if you're attributing the falling away first to the rapture and the revelation of the man of sin, the worst case you could make in that would be a mid-trib, because it's clear, even if you get the falling away first or the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ or our gathering together all wrong, and you think they all talk about the rapture when none of them do, you can't get away from the man of sin being revealed being the abomination of desolation, which is known by all to be a mid-trib event. It is so clear in the direct text that it's talking about the second of 2 things which must occur, being the abomination of desolation. There is an inherent belief that it's Revelation 4 and 6, it's the rapture and then the opening of seal 1. But when you actually read this, there is no getting away from the fact that this is a reference to the abomination of desolation. I'm sorry for whoever can rationalize that out of their head, because that is the most obvious part of this whole chapter, is that the last part of verse 3 and the whole of verse 4 is talking about the midpoint abomination of desolation. The only clearer thing would be in verse 5, where he says you need to go back to Acts. Not to II Thessalonians, but to Acts. Remember ye not that when I was yet with you, I told you these things. And so, as the Bible is wont to do, in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, let every word be established, or repetition. We're just going to repeat ourselves, and we're going to say it in a couple of different ways so that we understand the point, and we make our point, and people can get our point. So he's saying the 2 things which must happen before the second coming occur haven't happened yet, but they're related to the temple. One is related to the forsaking of Moses. That's the falling away first, is a forced cessation of Moses, which is the law, and the abomination of desolation. So now he's going to repeat himself and say, now ye know what withholdeth, that he might be revealed in his time. Okay? Well, the revelation will start at the end here. For some reason, I like working backwards. I'm not sure why. It's just the way God made me. So we're going to start at the end. But the reason I'm going to do that is say, because he might be revealed in his time. Well, we already talked about him being revealed in his time. The specific time appointed for the revelation of the man of sin, the son of perdition, is the midpoint of Daniel's 70th week. That is very clear. The man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who is revealed by going into the temple and declaring himself to be above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. This is discussed 4 separate times in the book of Daniel. Maybe more, but 4 always come to the top of mind. In chapter 7, where it talks about the little horn coming up among the 10, where he's given a mouth speaking great things, and it's because of the words which the horn spake that his body is going to be given to the burning flame. And the reason I like that for this chapter is because that is specifically what verse 8 says. Then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. The parallel passage to this is Daniel 7. Daniel 7, I'm going to guess. Daniel 7, 13. Nope. Daniel 7, 10 through 14. What does it say? A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 10,000 thousands ministered unto him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. Judgment was set. The books were open. And I beheld then because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake. And I beheld till the beast was slain and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. Verse 11. This is specifically 2 Thessalonians 2:8 is Daniel 7:11. Those are parallel passages. So it even tells you in here that it's the beast. Well, obviously in Revelation, it's talking about the beast going into the temple and declaring himself to be above all that is called God or that is worshipped. The beast is the one who was and is not and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go about his destruction or go into perdition. Perdition is the Greek word. We also did a word study on this in part 2. Perdition is the Greek word Apollyon. He's properly named Apollyon, the beast, the destroyer. He is the 4th beast who rises out of the sea. Well, he's the 4th beast from Daniel 7's night visions. He's diverse from the 3 that came before, which were the lion, the leopard, the bear. He had great iron jaws, devoured, break in pieces, stamped the residue with the feet of it. The feet, yes, which are attached to the legs. It's the Daniel 2 statue, legs of iron and feet of iron and miry clay. The legs of iron are your beast and your false prophet, which are beast 1 and beast 2 from Revelation 13. And then your feet of iron and miry clay are your 10 kings and your people who are going to worship the beast's image or receive his mark. But he's going to stamp the residue with the feet of it, which is from Revelation 13. It talks about him being given power over all kindreds, tongues in the earth to trample on the saints and to kill them and make war and all that stuff. So these are definitely Revelation 13 ideas, not Revelation 6 ideas. So taking us back here, we're going to go through verses 6 through 8, but I wanted to start with the revealed part because this is made extraordinarily clear in verse 3 that the revelation of the man of sin is via the abomination of desolation. Well, yes, that's 3.5 days after the beast who ascends out of the bottomless pit makes war against the 2 witnesses, kills them, their bodies lie dead in the street for 3.5 days. And then the Spirit of God enters them. They stand on their feet. They ascend up to heaven with 144,000 witnesses. In the same hour, there's a great earthquake. A 10th part of Jerusalem falls. The 2nd woe is past. Behold, the 3rd woe cometh quickly. The 3rd woe aspect of The third woe is trumpet 7, which is the midpoint. There is a preaching of the everlasting gospel, and then there is a reactionary event, and the reactionary event is the abomination of desolation, where the beast goes into the temple and says, worship me, not Jesus, because the preaching of the everlasting gospel says, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven, the earth, the sea, and the fountains of waters. And so the abomination of desolation is a reaction to the preaching of the everlasting gospel, where the beast says, no, worship me instead. This is the Daniel 7:11. I beheld them because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake. Yes, given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given over him to continue 42 months. He opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. So the easiest way to show that verses 6 through 8 are the same as verses 3 and 4 is talking about the revelation of the man of sin being revealed in his time. It's very specifically stated in the book of Daniel. So in Daniel 7 and then Daniel 8 talks about him magnifying himself in his heart. He's going to stand up against the prince of princes and be broken without hand. Yes, be broken without hand, because he's going to be consumed with the spirit of his mouth. He's going to speak and the beast will die, or he will be sent to the lake of fire. Same difference. But broken without hand means that Jesus isn't actually going to have to fight him. He's just going to speak, and that guy will be no more. Then it's Daniel 9 talks about the midst of the week is when those things will occur. And then Daniel 11:36 is the parallel passage specifically to this here. And it says, the willful king, the king of the locusts, the angel of the bottomless pit. The king will do according to his will. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. Read, be given power to continue those 42 months. And then in Revelation 3, it talks about him be given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. So you've got 4 times in Daniel where it talks about the abomination of desolation, into telling you specifically what the appearance of that shall be and when the appearance of that shall be. And it's bookmarked in Revelation 13 in verses 5, 6, and 7 specifically. And so really what we come down to in this chapter here is the understanding of why Paul would have been talking about Old Testament prophecy related to the second coming of Christ. And that just goes to where he was teaching and who he was teaching, which was Jews in the synagogue, and talking about how their law, psalms, and prophets point to Jesus. And obviously the import of the message is he's coming back. There is an expiration date on your beliefs, so better to do that now than later. And that really goes into there shall come a falling away first, because in our exposition or our exploration of that, we went to Acts 21 and talked about how Paul was teaching all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake or apostasy of Moses and to not follow after the law. There is a choice now for the Jews to not follow the law, because Christ is the end of the law unto righteousness for all those who believe. In the midst of the week, there will be a forced cessation of Moses. And then they will be amidst the worst time ever on earth. And it's like, choose to do it now versus be forced to do it later. And then talking about all of the implications of the forced cessation later, which is, again, midpoint of Daniel's 70th week. So, he shall be revealed in his time. That is obviously going to be a restatement of the abomination of desolation. Now you know what withholdeth, that he might be revealed in his time. Restrains. This is where the concept of the restrainer and people talking about who's the restrainer. It's not a who, it's a what. So this is actually stated twice. And this is why we really need to do expositional study instead of cherry pick verses out of here. Now you know what withholdeth. Yes. The sacrifice and offering holds back the lawlessness. This is a void that gets filled. When you think about what the 70th week is going to commence with, it's a reinstituted Mosaic law. They're going to rebuild their temple, reinstitute their sacrificial system. That will exist up until the midpoint when it's taken away. When it is taken away, lawlessness Where is, oh, the mystery of iniquity doth already work. Only he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way. In other translations of the Bible, it says, for the mystery of lawlessness doth already work. The mystery of sin, iniquity, lawlessness. Take your pick. But essentially what you have is the presence of the law restraining. And once that ceases because of the forced cessation, the vacuum that gets filled by taking the law away gets filled with lawlessness. It's the opposite. Like when the rapture of the church occurs, the vacuum that gets filled by the missing folks is going to be the outcome of the opening of seals 1 through 4. People falling prey to deception because the people who could tell them, hey, this is what you need to look for, are gone. And then peace is being taken from the earth. Yeah, I mean, even though it's not great in a lot of places right now, there is not a global cessation of peace. Right now, even if we're not actively at war with nations, or we're not actively at peace with them and we're just neutral, that all goes away. The implication of Seal 2 is peace being taken from the earth. People versus people, nation versus nation, global scale, national scale, local scale, all of it. Peace is being taken. And then you have the breaking of supply chains, famine, food insecurity, on a whole different level than what exists now in some of these, say, African countries where they have starvation going on and famines going on. It's a global scale at that point. And then death and hell followed after. It's the pestilence, wild beasts, war, famine, people dying in an unsaved state on a global scale, the likes of which the world has never known. When you look at the opening of the seals, you're looking at voids being filled by the absence of people who can, at this point, prevent such conditions. That doesn't mean that the rapture starts the 70th week, but it does speak to the amount of time that will not be present. I know some people talk about a gap. It's kind of wishful thinking. But when you're looking about the impacts on a global scale of missing millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, hopefully into the billions of people. I mean, I don't know how many Christians there are in this world, but obviously I hope for more than less. When you're looking about the immediate implications of that, you're looking at the voids being filled by everything that is evil and bad, because the people who could prevent are gone. And that's essentially what you're looking at here, is there will be the appearance of good via the worshiping in the temple, the sacrificial system, the appearance of good via the Mosaic law, but we know that can't save, which is why I say the appearance of good, the appearance of lawfulness. But if it's a forced cessation, you take that away, what fills the void? Evil, the height of evil. That's what you're looking at here, is behind the scenes that already works, but it already is present. It's already working, but there will come a point where it will become overt and not covert, and where the things that gave the appearance of propriety, or the things that gave the appearance of lawfulness, or the things that gave the appearance of restraint go away, and there is no longer restraint. Enter the second half of the 70th week, which Jesus describes as a time of unparalleled great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no nor shall ever be. And Daniel picks up on that and says a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation even to that same time. So you are talking about the appearance of propriety and lawfulness and the appearance of godliness being taken out of the way. Nope. Being removed. And the reason I just corrected myself is intentional. The reason I misstated something and then I corrected myself is intentional. Because this taken out of the way does not mean removed. There are a lot of people who believe that it does, and a plain surface reading of the text would lend to that belief. It assists in that inaccurate belief. So I misstated something that you probably didn't even catch. And then I corrected myself because, nope, that's not actually what that means. And I want to make sure that we're clear on this. So you are looking at the presence of lawfulness being forced to cease, and the void that will be caused, mainly because this beast is given power to stomp over everyone, to tread on them, and to kill whom he will, to make war with whom he will, without restraint. So it is important to note the sequence of events in the midpoint. There's a forced cessation of lawfulness and a maximalist person introducing lawlessness, the man of sin, the man of iniquity, the man of lawlessness, who is embodied in the beast. And again, he's being given power to continue 40 and 2 months. So what withholds him? Well, there's a couple of different things. Because he's going to be revealed in his time, which means he can't be revealed before that time. That's part of the reason he's locked in the bottomless pit, and that he has a designated time. He is not just here. This beast, this Revelation 13, beast 1, not beast 2 either, and not the 10 kings, are not here on earth. And they cannot be here until trumpet 6, because that is the loosing of bound angels. That is specifically what trumpet 6 is all about, is the loosing of bound angels, one of whom is the beast from Revelation 13, who this chapter is talking about. So the revealed in his time means that he is not here, and he cannot and will not be here prior to the specific time in which he is given to ascend out of the bottomless pit, which again is only 3.5 days before the midpoint of the 70th week. And then he's given power to continue 40 and 2 months. So what is withholding him is twofold. First of all, he cannot be here prior to that point because he is specifically bound until that point. But second of all, lawlessness cannot reach maximum while there is the presence of lawfulness. So lawfulness must be removed before lawlessness can peak. And that is what you're talking about here, is this is a reference to the what is withholding? Lawfulness. Until such a time as lawfulness ceases because of forced cessation, and lawfulness comes to a maximum. So that's verse 6. Let's talk about verse 7. For the mystery of iniquity doth already work. We already know that sin, lawlessness, iniquity is already working behind the scenes. I mean, that has been since the days of Genesis 3. And it will reach a peak that Jesus will ultimately destroy with the spirit, consume with the spirit of his mouth and destroy with the brightness of his coming at the second coming. So from Genesis 3 all the way to Revelation 19, it exists, but it will come to maximum at Revelation 13 and persist for those second 42 months, times and a half, 1,260 days of the 70th week. Only he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way. Let is the word to restrain. So now you're restating these things again. This second half, I'm going to make this bigger because we're going to focus on this for the rest of this video. And then there will be more parts to this, but I wanted to specifically focus on this part of the video because so stinking many people get this wrong. And I have been one of them in the past, which is why I have it on my heart to do this, because I want to help you people who might be as I was and misunderstand this. I don't want you to misunderstand it. So there are two things that are being discussed. What withholdeth Moses, the law, that he might be revealed in his time. It's the abomination of desolation. So you're talking about these two things that were revealed up here, come a falling away first, and the man of sin be revealed, son of perdition. These are the two same things that are being referenced here. The what is withholding and the revelation in his time, okay? So now we're going to say the same thing a third time. Only he who now letteth will let, restrain, withhold, until he be taken out of the way. This is one of the primary reasons that people get this wrong, is because a surface reading of the text will lend you to take away the opposite idea. When we talk about in English letting someone do something, it's like allowing them to proceed forward with something. But that is the opposite of what this means. Letting is restraining or withholding. It is a restatement of the first half of verse 6. Only he who now letteth will let is now you know what withholdeth. So let's do a word study. Verse 7, II Thessalonians 2:7. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now letteth restrains Yep. And even when we go down here to the King James, this is just BibleHub.com. You guys hopefully know by now that I'm a fan of this because it gives me a couple different translations, but it's very specific to word studies, word meanings, word locations. I just have to find it. Oh, here we go. Right here. Now you know what withholdeth that he might be revealed in his time. For the mystery of iniquity doth already work. Only he who now letteth will let. Letteth will let is this Greek word katecho, to hold fast. Have, hold fast, keep, possess, retain, seize on, stay, take, withhold. So let means to restrain or withhold, which is specifically what it says up here, to hold fast, hold back. So this is why I say, now you know what withholdeth is the same as saying only he who now letteth will let. But what's interesting about this is you go from a what to a he. And this causes some issues too, because this is where people talk about the restrainer, and the restrainer is who? Some people say Michael. Some say it's the Holy Spirit. You've got a broad range of what people believe the restrainer is because of this word he here. I'm going to get really specific on this, but I'm not going to spend very much time on it. What I want to make sure that we understand is that the falling away first, not Matthew, Acts 21. Actually, well, I'll just, as I mentioned before, the falling away first, only he who now letteth will let. Now you know it withholds in his time. Are saying the same thing. So in verse 3, this phrase, except there come a falling away first. Now you know it withholdeth, and only he who now letteth will let. Those are all saying the same thing. All saying the same thing. So what we need to do is we need to go to the word study that we did up here in verse 3 to gain context for verses 6 and 7, which repeat. So that's what I'm doing here. And I already did this. It's the Greek word apostasia, and it's 2 times. There are 2 times where it's mentioned in the Bible. Here in II Thessalonians 2:3 and in Acts 21:21. And it's the forsaking of Moses. That Paul was teaching all the Jews who were among the Gentiles to forsake or apostasy of Moses. Right here. So now we know what withholdeth. Regarding the 70th week, the what withholding or restraining is the law. The Mosaic law that will be reinstituted until it is forced to cease. That is the context here. The what withholdeth is the Mosaic law, which will be reinstituted at the commencement of Daniel's 70th week. It is the Daniel 9:27 covenant. Only he who now letteth will let. Yes, this is not actually a person. It is a word with a masculine gender. This is why word studies are so necessary and why we're going back to the original time it was stated in this verse. Or excuse me, yes, in this chapter. They are informed of thee that thou teachest all the Jews which are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, that they ought not circumcise their children, neither to walk after the customs. Correct. This is a reference to the Mosaic law. When you are looking at what is withholding or restraining or the falling away, you are talking about a cessation of the law. So the most appropriate context here would be only he who now letteth will let. Who's restraining? It would be Moses, technically. But it's more specifically talking about the Mosaic law, which is why it started up here calling it a what. It's not a who, it's a what. But if you want to talk about who because of he, it's Moses. And this is, like I said, these are all going to stem from the original reference in the chapter, which is a falling away first, which is the forced cessation of the Mosaic law shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate. Well, just as this is referenced 3 separate times in this chapter, so is the second part. So the revelation of the man of sin via the abomination of desolation is once there. It's once here that he might be revealed in his time. And it's also here until he be taken out of the way. This is not removed. This is to come into being. This is the single worst trip up I see. So, taken out of the way, to come into being, to happen, to become into the midst. This isn't the Holy Spirit removing the church, or Michael taking Israel into her place where they're nourished for a time times half a time. This is the revelation of the man of sin via the abomination. He ascended from the bottomless pit and he has come into the midst. It's the Greek word from hinomai, but it's henete, to become, to come into being, to happen, to be made, to be done. The manifestation of the man of sin at his appropriate time. Properly to emerge, become, transitioning from one point, realm, or condition to another. To become signifies a change of condition, state, or place. Means to come into being, manifestation. Correct. This is not the church being removed. And this is not the remnant, the flight of the remnant. This is the revelation of the man of sin via the abomination of desolation, to come into the midst. It's a manifestation, a physical manifestation, which is synonymous with his coming. For the mystery of iniquity doth already work only when the law of Moses ceases, will the man of lawlessness come into being. Then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. Yes, as we talked about, parallel passage in Daniel 7:11. Even him, beast one, whose coming is after the working of Satan with all power and signs and lying wonders. That's beast 1 and beast 2 from Revelation 13. So we're actually going to stop this video here. I think I've probably given you guys enough to chew on here. So when we pick up, we're going to start talking about how the parallel passages for the rest of this relate to Revelation 13 and beyond, specifically Revelation 13 and 14 and 15. But we'll stop here for now. So this is part 3 of this. And in part 4, we will probably finish the rest of this chapter and talk about the repercussions of the actions that had caused these people to stop what they were doing and how that was negative and how Paul is admonishing them to get back to business in the final chapter. So stay tuned for part 4, but this has been part 3. And as always, if you guys have questions, let me know. I know I threw a lot at you, but this is a deep chapter. It's a deep concept, and it is made infinitely more difficult by the word choices used. I was not a transcriber of the Bible, so I cannot tell you why they used the words that they did and why you need so many different word studies in order to get to the bottom of what this is saying. I don't know the answer to that, but what I do know is this is the single biggest, with the exception of Matthew 24. But this is the single biggest chapter that I've ever seen taken out of context. And it's taken out of context bad. Hopefully this has been helpful. I'll see you in part 4.